from the noble Lord, the Earl of Lytton.
It's a great pleasure to follow the noble Lord Blencathra. Just briefly to start, in relation to Amendment 115 that the Lord Blencathra discussed, the issue of the 11-metre question. The emphasis is often posed as to whether there is less risk in terms of safety under 11 metres or over 11 metres, and I think that slightly misses the point for me, which is regardless of whether you resolve that, the problem is that freeholders are still charging and doing remediation work on under 11 metres buildings, and therefore there are costs that those people who live in under 11 metres buildings have to pick up. So the lecture about it's less risky under 11 metres really needs to be said to the freeholders, not necessarily to the leaseholders, but it doesn't really help us, I think. More generally, and to talk to my amendment, I wanted to say that this is such an important group of amendments, as the noble Baroness Pinnock, I think, passionately reminded us of the context. And it is true that for being a leaseholder today is no longer just a description, but it's almost become a full-time job in terms of fending off more and more financial demands, getting on top of the law. You actually go and meet a group of leaseholders and they're having the kind of discussion about the ECHR that we've just heard the learned friends discussing, because they're trying to get on top of all these details and technicalities. And it's become an overriding source of worry and anxiety. And really, genuinely, rather than just a status of home ownership, it's become a sort of hellish state of affairs. So anything that can resolve that, and that's why this bill is so important and this group of amendments matters. But actually, in terms of my amendment in this group, it's really a very tiny little and modest amendment that relates to valuations. I'm speaking to Amendment 165A in my name, that asks that any valuations used to decide on caps for those still being charged for remediation should be looked at in a slightly different way. I obviously don't want there to be anything paid. I'd go with peppercorn or nil. But if there are caps deployed and valuations used, I just wanted to remind us that we need to rectify a different kind of injustice. The amendment asks that those valuations take into account that the leaseholder's ability to pay will have been affected by the fact that their main wealth may be in the form of their asset, their home, and that their asset's value may well be devalued hugely due to fire safety and building safety policies. And the amendment notes that the properties may well be in negative equity as a consequence of government measures. So I just wanted to read you out a few examples. We've actually heard some before, but this is just very quick. Highbury Square Stadium, a flat there was purchased in October 2019 for $377,500. It was sold in May this year, or May 2020, for $167,000. That's just in a year, massive fall. But the Department of Levelling Up valuation is $400,000. Then you've got Brindley House in Birmingham, flat bought for $198,000 in 2007, valued by the Department of Levelling Up now as being worth $300,000, but actually only sold for $140,000, again below what it was bought for in 2020, many years after it was bought. It was devalued. And then a final one that I've got here is Royal Artillery Quays in South East London, £250,000 paid for it in 2006, but it was unsold at the guide price at auction recently for $210,000, and yet the Department of Levelling Up values it at worth £385,000. So what I think that indicates is that there's been a massive crisis that has basically affected the value of flats. They just are not normally to be valued in any kind of normal way. And I think it illustrates a broader problem as well, that flat sales are actually down 60% in 3 years, according to the Land Registry data. And this raises the concerns, more generally, I think, that the flats market could be killed off if they become unduly expensive through higher and higher service charges, as we discussed them earlier. I think it illustrates again the potential unintended consequences of aspects of this bill in terms of the implications for a housing crisis through this value on valuations and muddle on valuations. And it just means that the people who own these flats will just lose money if they try and sell them, but are going to be charged at a cap as though they were worth a lot more money. Just in terms of those caps on historical remediations, we've heard some important and persuasive arguments from the Noble Lord, Lord Young, and the Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans, about anomalies. And I think there are lots of inequities still left in the bill. And the least of these inequities is contained in the way the government has assessed who can afford to pay what. So, for example, it might sound as though someone who is well off, if they own a flat valued at more than £1 million, that must mean that they're wealthy. And I appreciate it's not necessarily popular anywhere in the world to be defending the people who own flats worth more than £1 million. But I think it's reasonable to point out that often a leaseholder that bought a flat worth £1 million might well be asset rich, but could well be cash poor. For example, maybe a flat was bought after a lifetime of work, meaning that they are enjoying their retirement in that flat. But as of now, they are not working full-time, so they're just not well equipped to pay a much greater cap of £50,000 over 10 years, compared to the £15,000 for someone who ironically has a flat valued at £999,999. But as the Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans, has pointed out, and in terms of that flat not being worth £1 million, I think it's just a really important issue not to forget. And it's also been raised by Stephen McPartland, the MP, in the other place, and I think it is a general issue that I'd like to hear the government consider they will re-look again at this valuation of caps, of houses for caps.
In this group.